because the U.S. imperialists, I mean, it wasn't enough for them to invade Iraq and topple the Ba'athist socialist government of Iraq and kill probably millions of people, create millions of refugees, push that country into chaos. Wasn't enough for them to occupy Afghanistan for 20 years, and the whole time they were there, keep the country unstable, keep the country in a state of chaos, have U.S. troops actually protecting the poppy fields and the heroin dealers. Wasn't enough for them to overthrow the government of Honduras in 2009 and topple the elected leader, Manuel Zelaya, and cast that country into drug gang chaos. Wasn't enough for them to foment a civil war in Syria and try to destabilize the Syrian Arab Republic, another Ba'athist Arab socialist country. That wasn't enough, right? It's never enough for them. The U.S. imperialists, they want to stay at the top. And when I say the imperialists, I'm talking about the big monopolies, the big corporations, the big banks, the oil companies, the Silicon Valley fascists, the gigantic mega corporations that sit at the top of American capitalism. They want the whole world as their captive market. And what they are doing with their wars is called degrowth. That's what these wars are. They are degrowth operations, right? You see all these people, all these fake woke synthetic leftists who say, yeah, growth is bad. I'm a degrowther. They are the very same people that support all these wars because that's what these wars are. They are degrowth operations. Iraq used to be a very prosperous anti-imperialist country. In the 80s, late 80s, Iraq had the highest living standards in the Middle East. It had built itself up with the oil money. And then they had the Gulf War, and then they had a decade of sanctions that ruined their economy, and then the USA invaded, and now Iraq has been degrown. Now Iraqis live in utter poverty. Millions have fled the country. The whole country's been destroyed. Iraq has been degrown. Libya used to have the highest life expectancy on the African continent. It built the world's largest irrigation system, the Great Man-Made River, constructed by Muammar Gaddafi and the Islamic Socialist government, raised millions of people out of poverty, universal literacy, universal education, universal health care, universal housing. Everyone got $20,000 when they got married as their marriage bonus, with shared control of the oil profits and people's assemblies. They had built up Libya to be a prosperous country, the most prosperous country on the African continent. And now NATO bombs and a color revolution, 2011 destabilization, Obama degrew Libya. And now it's in chaos and death and destruction, and people are fleeing and drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get out. And it's a disaster. It's been degrown. Syria, right? Again, very prosperous country, Ba'athist Arab socialism, cast into civil war, instability, millions of refugees. Now Syria has been degrown. Why do they hate Russia and China? Why do they hate them? They hate them because at the beginning of the 20th century, Russia and China were dirt poor countries. They didn't have electricity. They didn't have running water. They had a very low rate of literacy. And now, as a result of socialism and socialist revolutions, Russia and China are industrial superpowers. Russia is a huge, huge exporter of oil and natural gas. Every ounce of oil and natural gas they sell is an ounce of oil and gas somebody did not buy from Wall Street. And China is a creator of a huge amount of production. I mean, they have half the world's steel is made in China in the state-controlled steel industry. They have the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world, Huawei Technologies. China is a huge, huge center of production. It's lifted its people out of poverty. It's eradicated extreme poverty. In 2022, they got rid of extreme poverty. They raised people out of poverty. Right? They built a very, very prosperous socialist society. Every day, another person in China becomes a millionaire. They have many billionaires in China. I mean, so many people have had their lives turned around by the central planning and the socialist government. And so the USA hates China, right? They hate China. And that's what these wars are all about. They're about degrowth. They want the world poor and impoverished as a captive market. They want the world to be poor They want the world to be dependent, so it has to buy everything from ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron, from General Electric, from the big corporations that run the United States. It is about keeping the world poor. Um, um, okay, I'll write it down. About keeping the world poor so they can stay rich. That's what imperialism is all about. Gaddafi was financing infrastructure to unite all of Africa. That's what imperialism is all about. And it's always been like that. There's a great book by Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And it's all about how the European colonizers went to Africa and prevented Africa from raising their people up, and prevented Africa from developing its own independent economy, and held back and crippled and crushed economic development on the African continent so that Western capitalism and European colonialism could stay in control. You read about the Opium War, where the British, demanded, they forced the Chinese government to accept the importation of opium so that people could be turned into drug addicts and used for slave labor. And when the Chinese emperor said no more opium, the British not just once but twice waged a war to force him to accept opium and free trade. And there's many, many examples of this. Many, many examples of this. When the British Empire went to India, they burned all the textile looms and forced the people to import their cloth from Britain. Mexico, they've been growing their own food since long before Christopher Columbus came. But then with NAFTA, American agribusiness put all the Mexican farmers out of business. Now Mexico imports its food from the United States. It's lost its agricultural sector. That's imperialism. Imperialism is about degrowth. And socialism is about growth. Socialism is the understanding that with the banks and the factories and the major centers of economic power under public ownership and control, growth is no longer restrained. That's what socialism is about. Socialism understands that capitalism has a built-in flaw. And that built-in flaw is best articulated in something called the coal miner's riddle. The little boy is cold. He says, "Father, why is it so cold?" Father says, "Son, it's so cold because I can't afford any coal to heat the stove." And the little boy says, "Father, why can you not afford any coal to heat the stove?" And the father says, "Because, son, I lost my job at the coal mine." And the boy says, "Father, why did you lose your job at the coal mine?" The father says, "Because there's too much coal." That's capitalism. In systems of the past, people were homeless because there wasn't enough housing. But only under capitalism are people homeless because there is too much housing. There is an abundance of housing in America. There is no shortage of housing in America. But yet we have huge, huge homeless encampments springing up all over this country. You go to Los Angeles on Skid Row. You go to most major cities. In New York City, they have homeless encampments all over the city now. There's huge encampments of homeless people because there's too much housing. People are hungry because there is too much food. There's no shortage of food in America. We've got lots of food. And people lose their jobs, and people go hungry and line up and beg for food at Catholic charities in Queens, or at or at food banks around the country that are just having a huge amount of demand made on them. Why? Because there's too much food, right? This is capitalism. Capitalism is the only system where abundance creates poverty. The more wealth that is created under capitalism, the more housing you have, the more food you have, the more technology advances, the better and the wealthier society gets, the poorer people get. And that's because under capitalism, your only value is your ability to sell your labor power to a boss. You rent yourself out to a boss, and the boss turns your labor into profits. And the more technology advances, the fewer and fewer workers the boss needs to hire. He doesn't need as many workers, and technology advances, and he can churn out more and more products. And the rate of profit goes down because he can only make profits from human labor. And because of that, because he can only make profits from human labor, when he hires fewer people, the rate of profit that goes in, he gets from every product goes down. So he has to hire, he has to churn out more and more products. And the more technology advances under capitalism and the more wealth that is created, the poorer people get. And this is a highly irrational system. Self-driving cars. This is my favorite example. In a rational society, self-driving cars would be a great thing. All this labor that is, expended, all this human labor that goes into this thing called driving would be eliminated. No more cab drivers, no more truck drivers, and people could be more productive. They could spend their productive days doing other things, and the productivity of human labor would increase because it would no longer be necessary for people to engage in driving. But under capitalism, under our highly irrational system, self-driving cars would lead to riots in the streets. There'd be millions of people unemployed. It would be an economic disaster. It would be an absolute economic disaster. It would be an absolute economic disaster. That's not a rational society. And countries around the world that have been kept poor by imperialism, they've been degrown, they've been held in poverty by imperialism, have broken free. And they've adopted socialism to raise their people up. And Russia and China both became superpowers because they had socialist revolutions and they used socialist central planning to raise their people up out of poverty. And Cuba has had a socialist revolution and raised its people up out of poverty, created the greatest medical school in the world, according to Ban Ki-moon, has wiped out illiteracy and has done amazing things for the population. Has the highest life expectancy in the Caribbean. Medical volunteers all over the world, universal housing, universal employment. Cuba has had great achievements. And there's other countries that have had great achievements because of socialism. If you look at, Nicaragua, compare Nicaragua with their socialist economy, Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. Compare that to Honduras, the free market country. Compare that to Guatemala and their free market economy, right? Nicaragua, with its socialist, centrally planned economy, has done great things for the people of Nicaragua. Socialism is a highly successful system because it eliminates the irrationality of capitalism. That's just a fact. And countries around the world that have broken out of capitalism have adopted socialism as their mechanism. And the only way capitalism can continue functioning is with degrowth. And degrowth is the essence of fascism. If you don't want to take my word for it, take somebody who was living under it. R. Palm Dutt, Fascism and Social Revolution. The essence of fascism is forced degrowth. Fascism is about driving down the living standards, driving down consumption in order to stabilize the capitalist system. It's about destruction of the means of production, destruction of the economy in order to keep the capitalist system rolling along. That's what fascism is. Fascism is when capitalism is in a crisis, one section of the ruling class seizes control. That's Bonapartism, but there's other forms of Bonapartism. And then after they seize control, they forcibly degrow the economy. They drive down living standards. They engage in heavy-handed state repression. They throw a lot of people in prison camps. They kill a lot of people. They create an underclass of slave laborers. They mobilize the population to destroy and kill and set the stage for war. And this is a way of saving the capitalist system when it enters a systemic crisis. And you have a systemic crisis in capitalism. You have a systemic crisis as a result of technological breakthroughs and innovation. Every great technological leap is always followed by a long-term economic crisis. My goodness. Every amazing technological leap is followed by a long-term economic crisis because of the problem of overproduction. The problem of overproduction, the problem of the tendency of the rate of profits to fall is constant, and the capitalist system is constantly struggling to deal with it. But a big technological leap leads to a long-term crisis. And that's why we had the Great Depression of the 1930s. That was in response to the technological innovations, Henry Ford, the assembly line. In the 1920s and the roaring 20s, they would say Ford has overtaken Marx. Ford has defeated Karl Marx. Well, then the Great Depression came, and we saw that that was not the case. And the First World War was the result of the fact that there were a number of economic downturns, and the imperialists had no choice but to try and save their system by conquering new markets, beating down rival imperialist powers. And capitalism responds to big technological leaps with big economic crises. And nobody understands this more than Jack Ma, by the way, the CEO of Alibaba. He made this very clear. If you listen to the speeches he's given, he's understood the relationship between technological leaps, economic downturns, and capitalism, and the rise of fascism and war. This is all something that is understood by scientific socialists. And right now, I maintain that in the aftermath, just like in the 1930s, there were big technological leaps in the 1920s. And those technological leaps then led to a long-term economic crisis in the 1930s. And that economic crisis in the 1930s led to fascism, take one. I argue that right now, the huge technological leaps that came at the end of the Cold War, the computer revolution of the 80s, and the 90s, the dot-com boom, and the huge breakthroughs in technological innovation, this has led to a long-term economic crisis like the Great Depression. And this long-term economic crisis that is rooted in the economic, the problem of overproduction and the technological leaps, has spawned a new form of fascism. And it looks completely different. And its rhetoric is completely different. But none of that matters. And that's one thing that R. Palm Dutt makes abundantly clear in this book. There is no fascist ideology. There is no fascist aesthetic. They will make anything up to justify what they're doing. There is a fascist practice, but there is not a fascist ideology. Fascism is something you do. It's not something you say. If somebody put on a sheet and went around doing nice things for old people, went around protecting black people from racism, went around, uplifting women and immigrants, but they were wearing a sheet, it wouldn't matter that they were wearing a sheet, because the reason that we hate dudes in sheets is because dudes in sheets lynched black people. Dudes in sheets tortured black people. It wasn't about how they dressed. It was about what they did. The Ku Klux Klan is hated because of what they did, not because of how they dressed, right? A lot of kids are ghosts for Halloween and dressed like, the same way the Ku Klux Klan is. Right? They made a joke about that on South Park years ago. But the problem with fascists isn't how they talk. The problem with fascists isn't how they speak. It's not their rhetoric. It's what they do. Fascism is a practice. It is not an ideology. And fascism has a different ideology everywhere it goes. In Mussolini's Italy, there was a lot of futurism in fascism. In Mussolini's Italy, they were all about science fiction, and they were all about speed and progress and all of that. But if you look at what they actually did, they stabilized the economy with degrowth. They drove huge sections of the population into slave labor conditions. They broke the labor movement. Fascism in Italy was very, very much fascism. Nazi Germany, they were all about knights and castles and Wagner and anti-Semitism and Germanic paganism and all this stuff. But what did they do? They put a huge chunk of the population into prison camps. They it's actually quite interesting. I'm working on this is a concept I've been thinking about all day because I'm writing a book. How did the Nazis reboot the German economy? Right, 1933, Hitler came to power. He was named chancellor. A few months later, the Reichstag building got burned. Got lit on fire. They blamed the communists for it. So they arrested all the communist members of parliament. And after the members of parliament that were communists were arrested, at that point the Nazis had a super majority and set up a totalitarian state. So what did they do to stabilize the German economy? Well, the first thing that they did is they rounded up all the communists, all the leaders of the Communist Party, and they put them in prison camps. All the leaders of the Social Democratic Party, they rounded them up, put them in prison camps. And all the leaders of the labor unions, they rounded them up and put them in prison camps. And so all those people were no longer looking for jobs. They were now slave laborers. And they started using those people as slave laborers and giving them to corporations. Private corporations got this free slave labor of political prisoners, political dissidents, who were there free slave laborers. And that was a stimulus on the economy. All of a sudden, corporations got all this free labor from prisoners. On top of that, a lot of people got jobs as guards for the prison camps. And then, and this is interesting, I didn't realize this, the Nazis launched a campaign against women working. Did you know this? The Nazis launched a campaign against women working. They said that women working should be ashamed of themselves. They're taking a job away from a man. And they instituted a marriage bonus. So if you got married, you got a big, financial bonus, like a tax bonus, like this. You got a real big incentive. And so they drove women out of the workforce. So all of a sudden, women were no longer working in industry, right? Because if it was like a campaign, like there was just this huge stigma created around the idea of women working, and there was a marriage bonus to encourage people to get married. And so because of that, women were no longer looking for jobs. Then they built these highways called the Autobahns that stretched across Germany, the Autobahns. And then they started the MEFO Corporation, right? The Metallurgical Research Company, which was a company where they facilitated, foreign investment in rearming the country. And they set up a military industrial complex, and they started rearming the country and militarizing Germany. And they ripped up the Versailles Treaty that said they couldn't have an army. And then they started doing all of that. And by doing all of those things, by then canceling, by canceling the debts that they owed to German American banks, they got the economy of Germany rolling again. All of it was basically degrowth. And then 1939, it only worked for so long. In 1939, the German economy was crashing again. It only worked for so long. It was a temporary measure. Pretty soon, they had the exact same problem. They built all these tanks and bombs and weapons, and they had a whole bunch of airplanes and bombs and tanks sitting around. They had a whole bunch of people in prison camps, and the economy, they still wasn't growing. They still had the same problem. So they launched the Second World War to stabilize their economy. And what did they do during the Second World War? When they took over a country, they got slaves from all of those countries. Did you know this? That Germany was filled with slaves, right? That they would take over a country, they'd invade Poland, and then they'd take a bunch of Poles and take them back to Germany and use them as slave laborers, right? And that the way the German economy functioned during the Second World War is there were tons and tons of slave laborers. They had all these factories full of slave laborers. And they would depopulate the areas. They would just go and clear out populations and depopulate the areas. And that Nazism was all about driving down living standards, rolling back economic development to save capitalism. Wrote it down. Thank you very much. And Nazi Germany's economy was about degrowth, and it was an attempt to stabilize capitalism, and it was a failed attempt. It didn't work, and ultimately it led to a horrendous war, and World War II destroyed every major city in Western Europe. Every major city. London was destroyed. Berlin was destroyed. Paris was destroyed. Every major city was destroyed during that war. Every single one. And because of that, because every major city was destroyed in that war, right? At that point, the problem of overproduction was resolved, and mass destruction, mass death in China, mass death in Japan, mass death on the Korean Peninsula. It all led to an attempt to, it led to rebooting the U.S. economy. And then after World War II, we had a long period of economic growth, the post-World War II economic expansion. That's what we had. The post-World War II economic expansion. And so when we talk about fascism, how fascism, the essence of it is economic. It is about degrowth. It is about driving down living standards, reducing consumption in order to stabilize capitalism, drive the women out of the workforce, create an underclass of slave laborers, spend lots of money on tanks and bombs and weapons and preparing for war, have a big war so you can take people from countries as slave laborers. That's capitalism. That is the essence of fascism. Fascism is capitalism in decay. It is degrowth to save capitalism. At this point, it is very, very, very clear that we are living during the rise of Fascism 2.0. And Fascism 2.0 has a very different values system than the original fascism. But then again, fascism was never the same, right? Mussolini's Italy, they loved Jews. Nazi Germany, they hated Jews, right? Franco's Spain, fascism is different everywhere. Okay, so let's be clear about that. Fascism does not look the same everywhere, but the economics are the same. Stabilizing capitalism with heavy-handed degrowth. We are living in a period where the fascism that's emerging is emerging under the banner of wokeism. And we just need to come to terms with that. Now, that doesn't mean it will always be that way, okay? And it could change. But the fascism that we are living in is ironically calling itself anti-fascism. But the essence of it is the same. They want to stabilize the global capitalist economy with degrowth. That's what they want. They want to stabilize the capitalist economy by imposing heavy-handed controls and driving down living standards. They openly say this. They write whole books about this. Less is more. This is what they want to do. They do not make any bones about it. They want the world to be poorer. They want production to go down. They want to decrease the means of production. They want to keep big sections of the world in poverty, all to save capitalism. And they think the problem with capitalism is that it creates growth, which is not the problem with capitalism. If you read Marx, the problem of overproduction, the tendency of the rate of profits fall, the problem with capitalism is that capitalism holds back growth. But they don't think that. They think the problem with capitalism is that it creates growth, and that growth is bad, and they are going to create a heavy-handed state that mobilizes the population to carry out degrowth. And they have actually laid out for us pretty clearly what their fascist dystopia will look like. And I am not the only person who can see this. The whole country can practically see this. I mean, you listen to any conservative, they know what they're looking at here. The conservatives know that the government is run by a group of very, very rich people who want to make everyone else poor, who want to drive down the economy, right? When you read what conservatives and others say about the Great Reset, they know what's going on. The lower level capitalists know very well what's going on. There's a group of capitalists, the richest of the rich, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and the Rockefellers and the DuPonts and the Carnegies. And those folks have decided that to save capitalism, we're going to have a great reset and we're going to drive down living standards. And we see there's little pieces of the high-tech dark ages that they want to impose that are being negotiated right now. Right? There's not a clear fascist alliance yet. And it took a long time before Germany was ready to accept fascism. It took a long time. It's very expensive, and a lot of capitalists are going to not go along with it. And that Hitler put a lot of capitalists in prison in order to do fascism, right? That Bonapartism, or one section of the ruling class, takes power and uses the state to try and stabilize capitalism. In order to pull that off, you have to, there has to be a lot of bloodshed within the ranks of the ruling class. They've got no problem imprisoning workers, suppressing working class movements. But when they have to start suppressing each other, that's very dangerous. And because of that, it takes a long time. But we're starting to see the blueprint be laid out for their vision of a world where they impose degrowth to save capitalism. And they have pretty clearly spelled out various aspects of it. The first thing is that they absolutely want to reduce the living standards of the population. Everyone in the United States must get poorer. And the fact that we have a generation of young people stuck in low-wage, short-term service sector jobs, living with their parents, oh no, that's not enough. That's not enough. They want everyone to be poorer. And part of making everyone poorer is this belief that the problem is that Americans have had life too good. Ilhan Omar, I will read you what she tweeted out. I have it here because I've been working on the book all day. I will read you what Ilhan Omar tweeted out. Well, the Washington Post revealed that participants in Donald Trump's, protest and Capitol riot on January 6th, that many of the participants in those protests had suffered economic hardships, and that was one of their motivations. This is what Ilhan Omar said. It's not economic anxiety. It's anxiety over losing status and power that's fueling right-wing extremism. There is a white supremacy radicalism in our society, and we can't afford to dismiss or normalize it. So what Ilhan Omar is saying is that if working class people in Ohio and Minnesota and Pennsylvania are mad about losing their jobs, they're racist. That's what she said. If you're mad about losing your job, you're mad about losing your home, you're racist because you are losing your status and power and your white supremacy. You're losing your white privilege. So all the people in your town and your community who lost their jobs, Ilhan Omar says, no, that's not capitalism. That's not a problem of capitalism. That's good. They're losing their white privilege. That's what they think. AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib. That's what these people believe. They believe that if working class people are mad about losing their jobs, mad about losing their homes, and they're white, they're racist. That's what they believe. And so if having a job, having a home, being able to feed your kids is racist, is white privilege, well, then it makes sense that we ought to get rid of it for millions of people because them having it is racist. So that's like one of the first things. We have to have a mass reduction of living standards because the problem with racism isn't that black and brown people are poor. That's not the problem with racism. Oh, no. The problem isn't that black and brown people have less and we need to raise them up while we raise up everybody. No. The problem is that white people have it too good. So we need to impoverish and drive down the living standards of the white middle class of America. And anyone who would get in the way of that, any workers who would occupy their factories and demand that they not close, anyone who would go out and protest and demand food stamps, anyone like Jimmy Dore who demands, force the vote, right, and wants to demand Medicare for all, they're Nazis. They're racist because white people have it too good and they deserve to be poor. And that in order to degrow and get rid of all the privilege, we have to drive down living standards. That's the first plank in the fascist platform, right? We have to drive down living standards. We have to reduce consumption, drive everyone into poverty, and anyone who disagrees is racist. And you don't have to be white to be a racist. Did you know that? You can be Asian and racist. They really don't like Asians, by the way. They really hate Asians, right? Asians, because the Asian small business owners, right? The Korean store owner who works really, really hard and has that store. Oh, they hate the Korean store owner, and black people who voted for Trump in bigger numbers than they've ever voted for any Republican. Oh, they're all racist too. I don't know how that works, but anyone who doesn't want to see their community get poorer is racist. So that's the first plank. Second plank in their platform. This is an interesting one. They want to completely eliminate the small businesses. Right? Just completely roll over them. Right? Small businesses, can't have that, right? Just put them all out of business, right? They want to secure the monopoly of big corporations, Walmart, Amazon, companies like that, because those big corporations are woke. They have pride flags and Black Lives Matter flags, and they're woke. But in order to create ultra monopolies and just eliminate the small business owner, in order to do that, these big corporations that they give a monopoly to, they're all going to become cooperatives, right? That's what socialism is. It has nothing to do with getting rid of the rule of profits. It's just about being a cooperative. They're going to create cooperatives. So that means that you will go to work at Amazon and you will bust your ass delivering packages for Jeff Bezos, and you will live in poverty. And at the end of the week, you won't even know how much you're going to get paid. Why? Because you won't get a wage. You'll get a stock dividend because you're a co-owner, right? And if Amazon stock goes down, well, you get a lower stock dividend. I guess we should all work harder since we're co-owners, right? And of course, Jeff Bezos will still have millions of dollars, and the executives will still be making millions. And of course, the workers will still get paid shit, but their ability to pay the workers shit will be even bigger and even more because they're going to be co-owners. And in fact, they'll probably set up a union that'll be part of their co-ownership, but it won't be a real union. No. It'll be a place that you go and sit with the other workers to talk about how you can help the degrowth agenda. They did this. This is exactly, by the way, this is the one thing about fascism that echoes. This is exactly what they did in Mussolini's Italy. This is exactly what they did in Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany, they outlawed all the real unions. They outlawed strikes. And then they made a person from the workers, from the shop floor, they put him in a room with the CEO and with a representative of the Nazi party, and they called it a corporate, right? And the idea was, wow, you now have representation because this company is run by a corporation or a corporate, right? Or a syndicate. And we've got a representative of the Nazi party, we've got a representative of the workers, and we've got the owner, and you all work together for the good of the nation. And all the workers in Germany, they were all technically part of a union called the German Labor Front. But the German Labor Front never went on strike. The German Labor Front was a place they went to and got to hear speeches about why they better work hard for the good of the fatherland and why they better accept lower wages and why they better report on their coworkers who had criminal thoughts. And that's what they're going to do, right? They're going to make us all co-owners. We're all going to work for mega corporations like Amazon and Walmart and Microsoft. And, that's who we'll be working for, Google, right? And we're all going to be co-owners, and we're all going to have a union where we go and get lectured about how we need to all get paid less and how we need to work harder for the good of Mother Nature and the good of social justice. And this is their scheme, right? And again, they have made it clear, if you believe in a centrally planned economy, you're a Nazi and you need to be reported. So that's the second thing, is this what they call corporate statism, which is not socialism because profits are still in command, but it's this This, in Spain, look it up. They called it national syndicalism. It's the same kind of thing. It's this, they keep profits in command, but they pretend the workers are co-owners somehow, and they create a fake union that's about pushing the degrowth ideology. That's the second plank. The third thing that they're going to do is it's going to be much different than Nazi Germany. This is very different than Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, because in fascist Italy, Nazi Germany, if you disagreed with the government, if you were critical of the government, you were in the Communist Party or whatever, they rounded you up and put you in a prison camp. Well, that doesn't really work so well, right? Putting people in camps has kind of gotten a bad name because of some certain historical events I could mention, so they can't really do that. So instead, right? This is classic, right? Instead, they're just going to cancel you. They just boycott you. If you have a criminal thought, if you question the great degrowth agenda, if you question the mighty social justice agenda, the wokeism, you lose your job. And then, your apartment, you got to lose your apartment. Your landlord can't rent to a racist or a sexist or a homophobe. And then the homeless shelter, they can't, house you because then they'd be housing and providing support to racists. And basically anyone who questions the government or the status quo will be homeless on the street. Right. And that's what they'll do. Society will boycott you. Right. It's the clever thing. Right. So now the whole thing is now, parents, you're not supposed to punish your children. Did you know that? You can't punish your children. Your children misbehave. You just ignore them. Right. You just withdraw from them. And that's what will happen. If you disagree, if you don't support the degrowth agenda, if you want people to have more, why then your company fires you. And, stores, you can't shop at stores anymore because they can't do business with you, and they cancel you. And they keep a big directory of every person who's had a criminal thought or done anything that goes against the party line, against the ruling party line. And they just boycott you. They just cancel you. They just boycott you if you disagree. And that's the third thing they're going to do. And the fourth thing they're going to do is that while we're all working in poverty wages for Amazon or Walmart or these giant corporations, and while we pretend we're co-owners of the company, and while we're all getting poorer and told that we should get poorer, and while we're all, living in fear of being canceled because if we say anything wrong, society will just boycott us. They're not going to throw us in jail, not going to punish us, but then they can't do business with us. Everyone needs to boycott anyone who thinks wrong. Then, to top it all off, everyone will be constantly mandated to become a regime change activist around the world. And part of showing that you're virtuous and part of not getting canceled is you'll be constantly outdoing your coworkers and outdoing your friends and neighbors and how much you support overthrowing some socialist anti-imperialist government around the world. And anybody who questions the U.S. foreign policy will be in danger, and it will be your assignment. Everyone will be assigned in their workplaces, in their schools, everywhere. Everyone will be assigned. Everyone will be assigned, to constantly be doing work to, support the foreign policy of the United States. It'll be your obligation to prove, like banishment in feudal times. Yeah. It'll be your obligation to prove your morality by constantly showing how much you support wars. You will be constantly doing off the clock activism to raise awareness about the need to overthrow the Russian government, overthrow the Chinese government, overthrow the Cuban government. This is the high-tech dark ages that they want. This is the monopoly capitalist authoritarian illiberal state that they seek to create. It is a degrowth, high-tech dark ages that they want to create. It is a low-wage police state that they want to create. And that's what they want to do. And it will be done in the name of socialism, because you're going to be a co-owner. It'll be done in the name of social justice. It'll be done in the name of saving the environment. It'll be done in the name of spreading freedom and human rights around the world. This is the dark ages that they have envisioned. And they are rolling it out right now. And they don't all agree with each other. Elon Musk, he doesn't agree about it. And he's been exposing some of the way Twitter has been used for this. And, there are disagreements among them. And they don't have a solid alliance to pull this off. But it's pretty clear that among the richest of the rich, this is their vision to save capitalism, is to create a weird, technocracy, a techno-feudalism, if you will, a weird attempt to roll back the wheels of history and degrow the population. And this is what they're doing. And a lot of it is brainwashing with social media and television, etc. And this is what they want to do. And that's the bad news. But the good news is this, folks. The good news is that humanity is not going to take it, because the overwhelming majority of humanity would see their living standards go down in this high-tech dark ages. Small business owners don't want to be crushed and put out of business. Workers want higher wages, not lower wages. People want freedom of speech and the right to say what they think and not be afraid of getting canceled. And the anti-wokeness, the anti-woke, the Ron DeSantis stuff, that's all a real sentiment among the population. Everyone is tired of the pronoun police. Everyone is tired of the cancel army, people are sick and tired of it. People are sick and tired of being afraid to say what they think. People are sick and tired of having the latest social justice crusade rammed down their throat. People are sick and tired of being told that they should be poorer and that wanting a better life for their kids and their family is somehow racist or sexist. People are sick of this. The overwhelming majority of the United States is sick of this. The overwhelming majority of the world is sick of this. Africa is sick of this. They don't want it. They're not going along with the war against Ukraine. They hate it, right? They love China. They love Russia. The African continent has huge, huge support for Russia and China in Africa. Latin America is not going along with this. And the bulk of the U.S. population isn't going along with this. Even though they've used your phone and your internet to shove this down your throats, people don't want to hear it. However, they need a real solution. And the only way you can fight this high-tech dark ages that's unfolding before us, the only way you can fight the low-wage police state, the only way you can fight it is with socialism. Because if you don't have real socialism, if you can't explain that the problem is not caused by growth, it's caused by capitalism and the problem of overproduction and the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, if you can't explain that, you don't have a mechanism to fight back against these people. If you can't explain why China has lifted millions of people out of poverty and why socialism is the way to make people wealthier and the way to overcome the problems of capitalism and the irrationality of capitalism, if you can't explain that, then you don't have any ground to stand on. And China and Russia are the center of the global movement of resistance to this high-tech dark ages.